Well, hello. I'm going to start this very special episode with a question. Do you ever wonder why you are so anxious, especially given what we've all just experienced for the past more than a year? Could it be from, according to my guest, it is from the anxious dragons that are breathing fire on the emotional center of your brain, causing you to feel fearful, nervous, tense, and or out of control? So am so excited about this interview on today's show because we all need to get empowered around our emotions. And my guest today, Dr. Daniel G. Amen, he's basically America's psychiatrist, but he's really a brain health expert. He has 9 centers all over the US where they do brain scanning. It's so amazing. So he's helped millions of people change their brains and their lives. He's the founder of the Amen Clinics, right, with 9 locations, as I just said. 12-time New York Times bestselling author and the co-host of the Brain Warriors Way podcast, which he creates with his wife, Tana. He's produced 15 national public television specials about the brain that have aired more than 120,000 times across North America. Dr. Amen believes we can end mental health by creating a revolution in brain health, and he regularly speaks to businesses, organizations, and churches about how to have a better brain and a better life. So I super hope that you enjoy my interview with Dr. Amen because I absolutely had a blast and I learned so much. All right, so why don't we just jump directly into the interview itself because I'm so excited about this book. I felt really honored that I had an early copy and it was so timely. So the first question I have for you about the book itself is, were you already writing it before the pandemic? Can I ask you?
I was actually mostly done with the book before the pandemic. And as it started and I saw it changing America, changing the world, I'm like, okay, we need to revise it. And so I actually open with the story of the interaction between me and Miley Cyrus, because like so many people, it was freaking her out. And it just saw how applicable the dragon, so for her, the death dragon and the grief and loss dragon were just causing trouble.
Right. Wait, can you back it up though? Will you do us a favor? Just give us, for those, because most people haven't read it yet because they're pre-ordering it now. I know the story, but just give the listeners and the watchers background on the story with Miley.
So it came out last year that I've been her doctor for about 10 years. And it was March 16th that it was a Sunday night. She called me. And like all of America, she was freaking out about the virus and would COVID-19 live on packages? Would it hurt her? Would it kill her grandmother? Um, and as I walked her back from the ledge, and we've talked about not believing every stupid thing you think, directing your mind to help you rather than hurt you. She said, and she's so smart and uh, understood it, processed it. She said, well, will you go on Instagram with me tomorrow with my 105 million fans and help them too? And then what she did is she actually went on to develop her own talk show during the pandemic called Bright Minded, and had a lot of experts and her friends. And what she did, I just love, she turned her pain into purpose. And in that way, helped her manage a really hard time.
So how did you help her manage it besides telling her, right? We all know we have lots of thoughts. We don't have to believe all of our thoughts. But what do you think was happening? Because in the book, you talk about the dragons, and one in particular that kicked up quite a bit for folks during the pandemic that is still happening is the anxious dragon. So tell us a little bit about that, the process, the dragons, and how knowing this is empowering.
So Your brain is always listening. My new book is divided into 5 segments. And it's about the influences that are always talking to your brain. And the first part is about the dragons from the past. And I think of these as the big psychological issues that people are dealing with. And there's 13 of them. So, for example, my dragon is the abandoned, invisible, and insignificant dragon. I'm one of 7. I'm in the middle, completely expendable, not special. And I've worked a lot on taming that dragon. The most common of all the dragons is the anxious dragon. Before the pandemic, 30% of people met the diagnostic criteria for an anxiety disorder. That through evolution, our brains were wired for negativity, and we're wired to pay attention to what's wrong. And it makes us anxious, tense, nervous, panicky. And then just imagine throwing COVID-19 and then the societal unrest and the political divide on top. And more than half of the country is struggling with the anxious dragon. Actually, in a survey I did of 20,000 people, 66% of them endorsed the anxious dragon. And if you know your big psychological issues, and I use dragons, I love Game of Thrones, and Tolkien, who wrote Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, said it's not a story worth telling if there are no dragons. And so I just imagined, in their drawings in the book of each of the dragons, what are the big psychological issues? And anxiety is huge. There's also, and this one has clearly popped up, the wounded dragon, where you have issues of trauma in the past, the death dragon, which usually pops its head up in midlife. But now children, 7, 8-year-olds, are worried about their deaths, the deaths of their parents and grandparents. It's happening way too much and way too early.
What I found amazing about the book is that it's very accessible. And so it takes some of these things that are, these are psychological, kind of heady concepts, and makes any person who's reading the book go, oh, that's definitely me and my dragon. And what I really loved, Daniel, that you did is that you shared a lot about yourself. And there was something incredibly normalizing. You're like America's brain health daddy psychiatrist, right? Like you're the person for, and have been for decades, that people look to for all of this comfort, and to know that you have your own experiences, and that you've got your own dragons, and that people can take the quiz, and we'll put all that on the show notes to really understand, because most of us know, like you said, like most people really do know what are the big pain points in their life, whether it's an abandonment situation, whether it's a traumatic situation, whether it's anxiety, whether it's over functioning, over giving, the over responsible. I have to say that was one of my dragons, feeling overly responsible for all the things, even though you can't control anything in a pandemic. That there is something really personalizing and beautiful about you sharing about your own life. So I appreciate that. And giving each one of the dragons in each scenario, you give people things that they can do to tame those dragons.
Yeah, so talk about their origin story, or how do they come about, what triggers them, how they cause us to react, how to tame them. So what would the things I do with my patients? I even talk about what movies they would like, which I found really a fun exercise to do, because my wife, Tana, has the judgmental dragon, where, if you grow up with chaos, or you think things are not fair, you begin to see things as black or white, good or bad. And they love vengeance movies. And it's just so true. Rather than watch the Academy Award winning movie, she'd much rather watch a Rambo movie or a Taken movie where someone is, getting someone back. And so just you can tell about somebody by the movies they watch.
It's so interesting because I have my own history in entertainment, and we both have had a lot of high profile clients. So I went from being a talent agent to being a psychotherapist 25 years ago. But I always am thinking about television shows and movies when I'm trying to explain to a client well, you know what it's like? Think about Grey's Anatomy. Do you know what I mean? Literally, where people go, oh, I get it. Right. That's what's happening. Or this behavior is codependent. Why do you think it is? Let's think about this movie. And I loved that there was a lot of pop culture reference in the book, and that it wasn't all super current, like, meaning it wasn't all right now. Some of it was right now, but I liked that we had some throwback movies and TV shows in there too, because I was like, yeah, that's correct. Some of us were not born in 1994, you know? So,
I
what are
know
you
I worry
finding?
that some of the references they might not know, which always horrifies me because it just shows my age. But uh, it's fun, and it teaches people to rewrite the stories in their head because we're all writing our stories. And the dragon that's also incredibly common, but it's driving the epidemic of teenage suicide is the inferior and flawed dragon. It's the dragon that says, I'm not enough. And social media is just feeding that dragon. And, with teenage suicide, especially in girls, skyrocketing now, it's because they feel like they can never live up to the images they're watching over and over and over again.
Right. There's this whole thing about, comparing your life to someone else's highlight reel. We've all heard that online, like, don't compare your daily life, and don't compare at all. And this compare and despair, I found in my therapy practice, even in the beginning, especially, most of my clients are women, and I would see that that's there. But the advent of social media from, I'd say, 2008, 9, even though of course it existed before that, but where it exploded, where regular people, you didn't need to have a business or something that was being benefited by social media. We're just Facebook, like everybody was on. I really saw this shift in people's self-esteem, and really believing, like, I think everyone else got the memo, but, like, I was absent that day. I feel like I'm on the outside. I feel like I don't have those things. How this person just had a baby and they walked out of the hospital in their skinny jeans, right? That was an issue that one of my clients had. And I was like, okay, no. First of all, that's probably photoshopped, but even if it isn't what makes us unique, our own life experiences. And I also used to represent supermodels for a living, right? I used to negotiate contracts. And sometimes people would say to me, how does that make you feel? Like, do you feel insecure? And I'm like, first of all, no. I'm the agent. They're the talent. Like, why would I be comparing myself to, like, Naomi Campbell? That's ridiculous. And if my only job, one of my only jobs was to be super fit, and I had a whole team of people to help me do it. I don't think I could look like Naomi Campbell, but I definitely could be whatever size I was supposed to be. So it's almost like putting yourself in a circumstance that you have no idea what is going on. So what do you think with circling back to the teen suicide, especially the girls? So what is this kicking up? And from, the point of view of the book, so what is the dragon when people are comparing themselves all the time? It's the not good enough.
Inferior and flawed dragon. And it's so toxic. Um, I teach people in the book my favorite rule. It's called the 18-40-60 rule, that says when you're 18, you worry about what everybody's thinking of you. And when you're 40, you don't give a damn what anybody thinks about you. And when you're 60, you realize no one has been thinking about you at all. People spend their days worrying and thinking about themselves, not you. So the real question becomes, what do you think about you? What's your goals? In fact, in the new book, there's a new 12-step program for addictions and bad behaviors. And I just thought to myself, AA was actually the 12 steps in the anonymous programs were developed 85 years ago. And there's not one piece of neuroscience in those 12 steps. Now, I'm a fan. I've sent people to AA or NA or Sex Anonymous meetings for a long time. I'm a believer in them, but they can be better. And for me, step one is not, is your life out of control? Step one is, well, what do you want? What do you want in your relationships, your work, your money, your physical, emotional, and spiritual health? What do you want? I think that's all, it's foundational. If you want your brain to listen to anything, know what you want in a balanced way. And then step two is, are you out of control? Has the behavior hijacked your brain? And if it has, then we go to step three, which is get your brain right. And it's like the big missing piece in mental health. I hate the term mental illness. I've always hated it. It shames people. It's stigmatizing, and it's wrong. They're brain health issues, not mental health issues. Anyways, because when you get your brain healthy, the dragon tamer comes out, that's your frontal lobes, and begins to control those behaviors and dragons that don't serve you.
So, what would be an easy step? Because I know you've got so many great ideas in the book, but what is something if someone's like, hey, I want more frontal lobe action? What would you say is something that people can start to do?
So I have a whole bunch of tiny habits in the book. I've been working with BJ Fogg at Stanford for a number of years on how people change. And they generally don't do huge changes at once. And so it's like, what's the smallest thing I can do today that will make the biggest difference? And the tiny habit for your brain is whenever you go to a decision point in your day, just ask yourself, is this good for my brain or bad for it? And all you have to do is know the list. And most second graders would get the list mostly right on what's good for their brain or bad for it. And if you can stay with that question, I have a couple of questions in the book that I think are just so important. Like, does it fit? Does my behavior fit the goals I have for my life? So not telling anybody what they should do. Mm-hmm. You have goals. Does your behavior fit? So for example, if I want a kind, caring, loving, supportive, passionate relationship with my wife, I need to supervise the words that come out of my mouth. And I really shouldn't say everything I think. You know, Terry, I must say that like 5 times a week to my patients. You don't have to say everything you think. You get all sorts of weird, crazy, stupid, sexual, violent thought that nobody should ever hear, except maybe your therapist.
I think that's such great advice. And the thing about honesty too, or this oversharing type of a thing, I think that there's a lot of times there's confusion about the difference between someone has a thought and that they feel like if they have to share, they need to share it because that's being honest. And I agree with you. That's not necessarily so. It's just a thought. And it doesn't even actually make it true, like in the bigger sense. It's just a thought you just had. They come, they go. We don't have to hold on to them forever. They're not written in stone. And if it is not good for your brain or aligned with your goals, perhaps that's a thought we could leave wherever it was. We don't need to keep holding on to that thought. I had another question for you about the hopeless and helpless dragon, because this is something that is running rampant right now, this feeling with the pandemic, with what's happening in the world. And yes, things are changing a bit, but that doesn't mean that people are still not feeling this way. Depression has tripled, as you've said, and as you've been talking about. How can people manage depression in these turbulent times?
It's so important. When the pandemic happened for me, it was March 10th. and I had scanned Mel Robbins, and I was going to be on her television show. And I was in my bathroom in California getting ready to go to New York, and the producer called me and said, "Don't come. They're closing the studio, and I think they're going to close New York." And I'm like, "Oh my goodness." And I remember writing down that night, mental hygiene is just as important as washing your hands, that we need to disinfect our thoughts and tame the dragons. And the big dragon, as you mentioned, is the hopeless and helpless one. And to tame that one is something I call positivity bias training. We do cognitive testing on everybody that comes to one of our 9 Amen clinics across the country. And negativity bias is so high in our depressed patients. And positivity bias just means let's just nudge your brain to look for what's right rather than what's wrong. And so I have all of my patients, and I do this myself. I start every day with today is going to be a great day. Why? Because then my unconscious mind will look for what's right rather than what's wrong. I got to talk to you today, and that makes me happy. Before you go to bed at night, so I say a prayer, and then I go, "Well, it went well today." And research shows if you do that for just 3 weeks, it increases your level of happiness. Well, I've been doing that one for years. That's my favorite of it's like my favorite time of the day because it's always a treasure hunt. That and I coined this term micro moments. I look for the little things that, I figured out how to make brain healthy hot chocolate during the pandemic. And so I just think of the first sip of the brain healthy hot chocolate that I just love. And, like so many people, I'm busy and good things happen and I don't really focus on them. Well, I do right before bed. And last year was hard for me, like it was for so many people. I lost my dad from COVID in May, and it was just the worst day of the year. And I remember when I went to bed that night, because it's a habit. There's a whole section in the book on bad habit dragons. Well, once you do something enough, your brain is just going to continue to want to do it, whether or not it's good or bad for you. So you might as well put good things in. And so the night my dad died, I went to bed and I said a prayer. And then I went, well, what went well today? And then the other part of my brain, the prosecutor in my brain, objected. It's like, you can't do that today. That means you don't love your father, your bad son, all the nonsense noise. But then my brain went to this great interaction between my mother and the police officer. And, Mrs. Amon, because someone died at home, we have to do an investigation. And I'd been working with the Newport Beach Police Department. So I knew this officer. And my mom looked at him and said, "Do you think I was having an affair and had him killed?" And she was kidding. And it was hysterical. And then I thought about the hundreds of texts I got from my friends, because I come from a large family. So as soon as anything happens, a whole bunch of people know. And then I just thought about sitting with him before the coroner took him away. And I was holding his hand and I remembered how soft it was. And then I went to sleep, which is a night I usually wouldn't have slept at all. But because I discipline my mind to look for what's right, even in the darkness, it can be helpful. Our habits, they're helping us or they're hurting us. And I love the positivity bias training. It's our brains are not wired for positivity, they're wired for negativity. But you can change that. That's sort of the cool thing I've learned in my career is you're not stuck with the brain you have. You can make it better.
You sure can. There's a whole beautiful story in the book, and it's kind of this ongoing story about you and your dad. And I wonder if you would just tell a little bit of it because I found it incredibly moving. I've got my own dad stuff and story, so I was very interested as soon as I was like, "Oh, this is going to be good. I'm gonna get to follow this along." So, would you just tell the listeners a bit about? You don't have to give it all away, but there was
Oh,
something very
he's
hopeful
part
about
of
it.
a number of my dragons, like my wounded. Yeah, so my dad is the child of immigrant parents who were very poor, but he had a very high work ethic and ended up, he started work at 12 years old in a grocery store and ended up being the chairman of the board of a $4 billion grocery company. And but he was gone, and when he wasn't gone, he was critical. And I remember in 1979 I told him I wanted to be a psychiatrist, and he asked me why I didn't want to be a real doctor, why I wanted to be a nut doctor and hang out with nuts all day long.
Nice.
So he just didn't get Father of the Year award. And I remember I tell this one story in the book about, I'm a child and we have a goat, and a goat's named Sugar. And I love the goat. In fact, I have a new public television special coming out, and I show video of Sugar and me when I'm 5. But the goat also loved his roses. And so one day he sent the goat away. And then a couple of nights later, he was joking that they were feeding us the goat. I mean, it's just horrible. And uh, so we had conflict. And then when I decided to get healthy, after I started looking at people's brains about 30 years ago, I'm like, oh, the brain's actually an organ. And if you're overweight, that's bad for your brain. And as I nudged him to get healthy, he's like, oh, now you're a health nut. What's with you and the nuts? But about 7 years ago, he got sick and had heart failure and then a heart arrhythmia and got depressed. And he looked at me and he said, I'm sick of being sick. What do you want me to do? And he just did everything I asked him to do and lost 40 pounds. And we started working out every Sunday. And the last 5 years of his life, he was my best friend. And yeah, it's pretty cool.
I mean, it's such a,
He's responsible for some of the dragons.
oh, as are all of our parents, but there was something, so many people, Daniel, don't get the opportunity for that like rapprochement to come back together to sort of close that loop in a way that's satisfying. And so I just loved reading that you guys were workout partners and it just feels so good to see that it's possible that you can heal and how he transformed also later in his life to look to you and respect you even though he didn't know why he wanted to be a nut doctor, but then suddenly maybe that was something that was going to work for him. So it's like came full circle, and I got to say as a reader it was very satisfying. And so much of the rest of what was in the book I found incredibly helpful. I felt like it's a story, but for people listening, it's really a guidebook. It's a reference guide of if you are suffering, you can identify what am I doing that is basically perpetuating my own suffering. What can I do instead? And then you share your stories and stories of clients, and there's something so accessible about that. But I wanted to ask you, because I've seen this as a clinician myself, but I wonder what you're witnessing. How has, with the pandemic and people being isolated in a different way, how is this fueling their dragons, as you would call them, or their negativity in their brain, or their neuroses, or whatever?
So it's actually a double-edged sword in the sense that a lot of my introverts love the pandemic because they don't have to deal with other people, because other people stress them out, make them anxious, drain their energy. I've seen a historic reparation between parents and children because for the last 3 generations, we've had 2-parent working families, and moms and dads are tired and they didn't have the time with children. I've seen long dinners. I know that's happened in my house where it wasn't happening before. There's just more time. And so I love that. But on the other side, the fear, the political divide. I mean, this is like my 10th presidential election, and I hardly ever talk about them with my patients. You know, I'm purposefully apolitical at work because I want to help you no matter what you think or believe or vote for. But the level of stress in my patients on both sides was just historic. Um, Isolation and worry about parents, especially parents who are in care facilities. Just the grief and loss dragon just it was there the whole time. I remember when my mom and dad went into the hospital together with COVID, I couldn't see them. And that was so hard. You know, I mean, like now, thank God for FaceTime, where you can actually be in the room with them. You know, if this would have happened even 15 years ago, we wouldn't have had the access that we do now. But I think that the other group that's getting hurt the most are children and teenagers. They've lost prom, they've lost graduation, they've lost their sports. My daughter's boyfriend was on the varsity tennis team, and he's so proud that he made the varsity tennis team. And then they didn't have a season. And so our young people are experiencing a lot of grief. And it's something that's going to impact us for at least a generation.
Yeah, and I think that there's guilt too. So what I find with I have a lot of nieces and nephews, and I have a bunch of sisters, and there's all kinds of kids. And the ones who are of the age of being in college, like this is their college experience has been not normal, right? So, some were ending high school, that was not normal, but they're good kids, and they feel like my niece was saying, listen, I just feel like it's not right to complain though, because people are dying of this disease. And I'm like, listen, but grandma would say, I know that kid has no feet, but I still have no shoes. Like your your sadness or your pain is real. We don't have to compare it to someone else's. And yet I could see them sort of wanting to minimize their own experience and yet being really bummed out that they were not getting a chance. They were doing school virtually. She's like, I'm supposed to be away at college and I'm in like my high school bedroom. Like it's super not what I thought was going to be happening. And yet, now they are back at school, even though their school just closed down. So, we're all becoming slightly more flexible. And the ideas, I wonder, this is not on here, but I'm curious about your thoughts and ideas because of your expertise with the collective trauma that we've experienced with being in this pandemic. Do you find that people's ability to pivot, to change, to become more creative in their lives, what are you witnessing in your clients?
A lot of that, actually. I've seen a lot of positive things. And I always talk to them about TLC, that there's research on resilience. And the people who are not resilient, who will struggle the most, see this as permanent, as global, and out of their control. And TLC is the people who are resilient, see it as temporary. It's going to end. And I often, when I was doing radio, I was on the radio in England every week for 6 months. And I would often quote from one of my favorite English writers, C.S. Lewis, who was talking about the atomic bomb in 1948, but it totally fit this time. It's like, well, you could have lived in the 16th century when the plague visited London virtually every year. And it's like, why are we upset when the scientists have just found yet another way to kill you when you are already condemned to die? And so he just does this beautiful job of shaking you into, all right, bad times happen in virtually every generation. What are you going to do about it? And if the virus comes, is it going to find you doing sensible and human things? And I just love that, because people who are resilient see what's going on as temporary. As local, yes, this is a global pandemic, but how is it impacting you in New York or me in Southern California? How is it affecting my house? And what can I do about it? And I must have prayed the serenity prayer with my patients 1,000 times over the last year. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That's mental health. That is really, what can I do about it? And what can't I do about it? It's an exercise I use for my patients who have trouble sleeping because of their busy brain. It's like, well, write down what you're worried about, and then write down what you can do about it and what you can't do about it, because the act of writing actually helps to get it out of your head. And we are all the authors of our own stories. And so when you know the dragons, you can actually rewrite the ending to the story. And I choose to train my insignificant dragon. And how I do that is I just work to make a difference in the lives of other people. And that really helps me.
So it's so interesting that this shift in perspective, though, that you're sharing, that it's possible to do it, and this collective pause that the universe decided we would all share in gave us an opportunity or an obstacle, depending on where you sit and what you experienced, right? I mean, your experiences are important too, but I love seeing people looking at it from the resilient point of view and saying, okay, but what can I do? And also finding the good. Like I'm always looking for positive news of people doing things like you're doing, helping others in the world. I love just finding those little news stories of people who are doing things they don't have to do to make the lives of other people better than it is. And so there's a lot of generosity and coming together that's happening too. But because there's been so much divisiveness, it seems like that is the thing that we know about the most, you know?
For people who've not seen The Social Dilemma, it's really a documentary worth watching. And our society is being engineered to look for what's wrong, because that's what sells to advertisers. And I think you have to be very careful. Like I tell all of my patients, you need to turn off the news, and maybe like 15 minutes a day at a site you trust. For me, I actually go to the BBC because I find it's not tainted left or right. And I start every day with an app called the Good News Network. And it's just, I want to put good things in my mind, because if you just watch CNN or Fox, they're focused on what hooks you in a negative way. It's always breaking news that you already knew about. And it's brainwashing us as a society. And when you know what your brain is always listening to, so there's a whole section in the book on the scheming dragons.
Oh, right.
It's basically society stealing our brain, like the newsmonger dragons or the porn dragons.
Hmm.
It's just so easily accessible to young boys that it's damaging their brains. Um, and the food pusher dragons, the toxic dragons, or the holiday dragons. It's a really cute dragon, but it's where we always are giving ourselves an excuse to eat badly and do things that are not good for us because it's Friday or because it's Thanksgiving. And it's like, and we're going to celebrate Christ's birth by getting fat. Why? How does that make, right, from a neuroscience standpoint? It's like, there's always a reason to lie to yourself. In the book, I talk about the little lies that steal our happiness, like everything in moderation. Having an affair in moderation could devastate your life.
Indeed. Has been such a pleasure. I super appreciate all of your time, and I want you to tell us, and we'll have all the links everywhere, and then I'm going to ask you another question, but where can people get this book and how can they learn more about, because you have these amazing clinics all over the country. There's 9 locations, right? All over the US, or is it just the US, your clinics?
Yeah,
So tell us where can we get the book? Let's start there.
So you can get the book anywhere great books are sold. Your brain is always listening. Tame the hidden dragons that control your happiness, habits, and hangups. And for people who pre-order or in the first week order the book, they go to yourbrainisalwayslistening.com. You can join a special event I'm going to have, get a whole series of hypnosis audios that I created, and get a free coupon for a bottle of Happy Saffron, which is one of my favorite supplements. We could spend an hour talking about saffron and the health benefits. I'm a huge fan of it. And you can know your dragons, which of the 13 dragons from the past haunt you at knowyourdragons.com. And our clinics, we have one in Manhattan, Washington, Atlanta, Chicago, 4 on the West Coast, a brand new one in Dallas. And that's where we'll look at your brain, because I always say, if you don't look, you don't know. And we can assess the dragon tamer, which is basically your frontal lobes. And is it healthy? And does it serve you? Or is it weak and hurts you?
I'm so excited. When this gets lifted, I'm coming to your Manhattan location. I cannot wait for you to scan my brain. I've already signed up for the pre-order. So exciting. So you guys, if you're interested in getting all of this goodness, now is the time to order the book. It comes out tomorrow, but you have the whole first week that you can still order it. And I want to ask you 2 more questions, and then I'm going to let you go. Because of your vast experience in life, I wanted to ask you, what has been your most challenging boundary struggle? Because that's what I'm most lit up about right now. And I'm just curious. I'm asking everyone. So, what is your most challenging boundary struggle, or what has been?
Well, in the bad habit dragons, there's 10 bad habit dragons. And one of them is the yes, yes, yes bad habit dragon. And so I think you really like that with your study and help on boundaries. It's people who say yes so they don't have to say no. And it's really a tool to manage their anxiety, their low self-esteem, to get accepted by other people. And what I tell how you tame this dragon is, when somebody asks you to do something, go, I have to think about it. I actually have my patients practice in the mirror. I have to think about it. And then go, well, does this fit the goals I have for my life? For me, it's taking care of other people. I dedicated my book, The End of Mental Illness, to my 2 nieces, because we got a call one day from Child Protective Services saying they had taken the kids from their parents. And right away, I just wanted to adopt them. And my wife is like, because they were from her family, and my wife is like, no, 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 we're not doing that. I have crazy people in my family, and I don't want to invite them into the life I've built. But I couldn't stand the fact that these 2 little girls were in foster care. And that was the worst week of our marriage. And finally, we agreed to wrap services around their mother and get them help. And even with great help, Mom didn't do great. And so we ended up adopting the kids. And I'm too quick to do that. I'm grateful I did. I love them like they're mine. And I know I'm going to change the trajectory of their life, at least I hope. But when someone's in need, uh, the should and shaming dragon. I grew up Roman Catholic, and my mother was serious about the whole thing. I was an altar boy until I was nearly 19. And so whenever I think, well, somebody should do that, you know, the should and shaming dragon goes, well, why don't you do that?
That's interesting because that actually is a boundary issue. So it's like, you know, your boundaries then become too porous, where you're saying yes, yes, yes. And yet, I love the end of that story because you ended up exactly where you were supposed to be. So I want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. It has been my honor and my privilege to be continued.
Thank you, Terry. What a joy to spend time with you. Thank you for all you do.
Same, same. Thank you.